The mirror stared back at Jeremiah Rendell. His blue eyes, once as clear as a spring morning, were now clouded with years of service and loss. He traced the faint lines on his face with a dry finger. Each crease was a scar of time, an imprint of a flood survived and a life rebuilt from debris. Beyond his modest apartment, the city of Camden, New Jersey sprawled, wounded but alive. The city bore its own scars, whispering tales of crime and corruption in each graffiti mark, each boarded-up window. Jeremiah loved Camden with the grim affection of a man for his battlefield, his crucible. The rain-drenched streets were more than just asphalt and concrete. They were stanzas of an urban sonnet, inked in perseverance and courage. A manila envelope, thick with the weight of secrets, rested on his worn wooden table. The front bore a single word, Whitewood. It referred to an aging monolith of Camden, the Whitewood Asylum. The mental institution, long rumored to house more than the mentally ill, had seen better days. Its imposing edifice, etched with the passage of time, now seemed to clutch onto its last vestiges of dignity. Money laundering, Jeremiah muttered to himself, flipping through the contents of the envelope. Records, transactions, patient files, a labyrinth of illegalities weaved into the very fabric of the institution. A photograph slipped from the pile, catching his eye. A grainy image of the asylum bathed in the silvery glow of moonlight. A chill trickled down his spine. There were figures in the background, indistinct and shadowy. A trick of the light, or perhaps the dark. A knock on the door stirred him from his thoughts. Detective Maria Sanchez, a tenacious officer with the Camden PD, stood at the threshold. Her dark eyes were full of questions that danced on the edges of her tongue. "You working a case, Jeremiah?" she asked, her gaze lingering on the envelope. "Perhaps," he replied, the corner of his mouth turning up in a wistful smile. "Or maybe it's working me." Sanchez furrowed her brows, an unspoken concern hanging between them. "Camden's got enough troubles," she said. "Just be careful, all right?" He offered a nod, a tacit promise in their unspoken language. When the door clicked shut, he returned to the chilling photograph. The shadows seemed to move when he squinted, as if whispering of a cosmic dread yet untold. That night he dreamed of water, dark and relentless, a memory of a flood that had swept everything away. But amidst the wreckage, he had discovered purpose, a reason to rise above his circumstance. Now, as he grappled with the mysteries of Whitewood, he felt a familiar resurgence, an echo of that purpose. He awoke with a start, the early dawn spilling into his room. The man in the mirror was the same, yet different, more determined, more resolute. The city of Camden watched him in quiet anticipation, the asylum a sleeping beast on the horizon. As the grit of the city stirred with the sounds of morning, he was already on the move, heading towards Whitewood. As he shut the door behind him, the figures in the photograph seemed to shimmer in the dawn's early light, whispering of the shadows that lay in wait. The Whitewood Asylum loomed on the fringe of Camden like a forgotten sentinel. Its stone facades wore the weight of time and secrets, whispering sagas of suffering and isolation. Jeremiah stood before its ominous gates, his reflection lost in the rusted ironwork. The asylum was a labyrinth of echoing hallways and antiquated wards, an arena for minds lost in their private abysses. A suffocating dread seemed to seep from its aging walls, creeping into his being. His policeman's instinct was a beacon amidst this unease, pulling him further into the darkness. In the archives, he found the ledger of patient records, a chronicle of human despair. Among the pages of incoherent ramblings and clinical notes, he stumbled upon a recurring theme. He traced his fingers over the faded ink, mouthing the chilling phrase, "The Shade Travelers." Shadowy figures crossing dimensions, voices from the dark, he murmured, his thoughts echoing in the silence of the archives. His skepticism was a thin veil, already starting to fray against the inexplicable. His musings were interrupted by the entrance of Robert Ainsworth, the asylum's director. His sharp eyes held an edge of wariness, veiled beneath a cloak of bureaucratic cordiality. "Interesting reading, Detective?" Ainsworth's voice was smooth, a stark contrast to the unsettling atmosphere. "Curious," Jeremiah admitted, holding the director's gaze. Do all your patients experience interdimensional travel? Ainsworth laughed, a cold, hollow sound that hung heavy in the air. Delusions, detective. A product of broken minds. Nothing more. Jeremiah nodded, the silent dance of suspicion and denial continuing between them. As he left, a shiver ran down his spine, as if unseen eyes watched his departure. The city of Camden felt different as he returned to its concrete embrace. He looked at the sprawling buildings, their silent silhouette cast against the night sky. A veil seemed to have been lifted, revealing a world interlaced with hidden shadows and unknown depths. That night, Jeremiah dreamed. Dreams of otherworldly landscapes veiled in eternal twilight, populated by eldritch silhouettes. He heard their voices, as distant as a half-remembered lullaby, and as near as a whisper in the ear. He awoke to a room filled with early morning light, his heart pounding in a disquieting rhythm. He looked at the man in the mirror, questioning the line between the detective and the case. His dream-laden eyes bore the first traces of fear, a human response to the glimpse of the unfathomable. Yet Camden still stirred with life. Its melody, a symphony of car horns, distant chatter, and rustling leaves, was a tether to the familiar. Clinging on to this semblance of normalcy, he set out for another day at Whitewood, the asylum standing as a monument to his growing dread. Jeremiah's days melded into a blur, indistinguishable and seemingly endless. As the mysteries of Whitewood Asylum unfurled, he found himself in the eye of an unseen storm, its toll wearing him thin. Time warped around him, moments stretched into eternity, while hours flitted away like errant sparrows. He found himself waking up in the most peculiar of places. Once in the damp, cold hallways of Whitewood, another time, he startled awake on a park bench, the moon a silent witness overhead. Each instance was marked with disorientation, a churning fear, and a cold sweat that clung to his skin. An anomaly caught his eye one such morning. His once spotless notepad was marred with strange symbols, etched in his handwriting, yet alien to his memory. The scribbles danced on the periphery of his understanding, hinting at an unseen world, a mirror obscured by fog. During a confrontational conversation with Ainsworth, he presented the curious drawings. The director's mask of indifference faltered momentarily, replaced by a flicker of dread that mirrored his own. The silence that ensued spoke volumes, their previous dance of suspicion evolving into a tense standoff. "Delusions, detective," Ainsworth echoed his previous dismissal, yet his voice wavered, a thin veil over an ocean of unease. Jeremiah knew better than to trust the man's dismissive facade. The experience was no longer solitary, it was shared. It hung between them, a specter in the room, making its presence known. The asylum was no longer just a silent building. It was an entity, pulsating with an energy that tugged at the edges of his sanity. Back in the heart of Camden, he found little solace. His city of grit and resilience now seemed draped in a veil of cosmic dread, each alleyway whispering secrets, each building casting long, spectral shadows. It was as if the town was a reflection in a darkened mirror, reality twisted into an unfamiliar caricature. His dreams intensified, the realms of sleep and wakefulness bleeding into each other. The whispers of the shade travelers were no longer confined to the realm of dreams. He heard them in the rustling of leaves, in the distant hum of city life, and in the quiet solitude of his apartment. His fear began to evolve, morphing into a strange fascination. His brave heart, though pounded by the relentless waves of the unknown, held steadfast, bearing the burden of his journey. His reflection, once of a quiet, optimistic man, now bore the weight of the unfathomable. One night, propelled by a hunch in the whispers that never quite left him, he ventured into the forsaken underground tunnels of the asylum. His flashlight revealed an ancient mural on the damp walls, a haunting depiction of the cosmic ritual of the shade travelers. His heart pounded in his chest, echoing in the silence of the tunnels. The whispers grew louder, forming a cacophony that threatened to drown him. As the fear washed over him, a sense of determination took root. He would not surrender to the darkness. As he emerged from the bowels of the Whitewood Asylum, the morning sun painted the sky in hues of pink and orange. The mural's ghastly shadows seemed to loom behind his eyes, hinting at a terrifying climax. Jeremiah found himself drawn deeper into the labyrinth of the Whitewood Asylum. Each secret passage, every shadow-laden corner, whispered tales of the ethereal. His reality was interlaced with creeping tendrils of another world, an alien existence that he was reluctantly part of. His days seemed punctuated by encounters with the asylum's director, Ainsworth, whose amicable facade had begun to crumble. Underneath, he saw a man harrowed by his own experiences, a mirror reflecting his haunted eyes. One such meeting escalated into a confrontation. As Jeremiah's accusations crescendoed, he saw a peculiar transformation. The confident bureaucrat was replaced by a shell of a man, his fear-filled eyes echoing a terrifying truth. The shadows, they are not mere stories, Ainsworth stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He confessed his part in the money laundering, a desperate attempt to appease the shade travelers and keep their wrath at bay. He was no longer just a detective. He had become a reluctant voyager, treading the thin line between his world and theirs. The confession did not bring him victory. It only deepened his dread, now laced with an understanding of the dire situation. One late evening, in the bowels of the asylum, he found himself face to face with the dark dimension. An obsidian portal, pulsating with a haunting energy, stood before him. Shadowy figures lurked at its periphery, their voices an eerie symphony of whispers that filled the room. The whispers crescendoed into an otherworldly chant, and Jeremiah felt himself drawn toward the portal. His heart pounded in his chest, his fear and fascination intertwined. It was at this precipice, staring into the abyss of the unknown, he found himself face to face with his ultimate test. In his pocket, he felt the cold touch of his service revolver. Its familiar weight was a silent promise of protection, a beacon of sanity amidst the chaos. The whispers grew louder, clawing at the edges of his mind. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of his survival, his purpose. He was a survivor, a man who had outlived a flood, and he would not be swept away now. He fired a shot into the portal. A high-pitched screech filled the room as the shadows retreated. The portal shimmered, its pulse weakening, and then, with a deafening silence, it was gone. He found himself alone in the room, the echoes of his narrow escape still reverberating off the cold stone walls. He left the asylum, stepping into the silent streets of Camden. His city was once again just a city, the spectral shadows replaced by the mundane reality of urban life. He was a changed man in an unchanged world. But the whispers never left him. They lingered at the edge of his dreams, a constant reminder of his brush with the unfathomable. He carried them as he carried his scars as a survivor, a witness to cosmic horrors beyond mortal comprehension. In the end, he did not emerge victorious or triumphant. He escaped, but the shadows of his journey clung to him, a quiet testament to the man who dared to tread where others feared. He looked at his reflection, acknowledging the haunted eyes staring back at him. His bravery had led him to the edge of reality, and his survival had brought him back. He had found his purpose and paid its price. As the last word of his tale closed, he turned towards the rising sun, a solitary figure against the dawn. A new day was breaking over Camden, and Jeremiah Rendell, once just a detective, now stood as a sentinel on the fringes of the known and the unknown. This end was just another beginning in his unending journey. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like it and subscribe to our channel, where you can find more similar stories, and click on the bell icon to never miss one. There is plenty more cosmic horror to come from the Eldritch Tales Factory. Stay tuned, and until next time.